Ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum. All right, guys. Good morning, Vietnam. Is that loud enough for you this time? I think we got the volume working finally. That was a lot of fun last time. Let me make sure everything is working now. Streaming. Cool. All right, so we have the stream working. Welcome back to the Exertus live stream, which is the part of my day where I put out a daily video. I'm going to try to keep doing these about an hour. I think the last one went a little over an hour. Maybe it was 90 minutes. I don't know. Maybe 90 minutes is a good way to go. Let me know if the audio is working for you, if it's synced properly. Is it loud enough? Thanks a lot, Iron Man. Good to have you here. I'm a big fan of Tony Stark and the technology he's put out into the world that I like to use. So cheers to you. Okay. Good audio. See, everyone was like, noob. Yeah, I know. Do you remember? I don't think you guys remember, like, one of the first times we got all the new equipment set up at Timcast. There was a whole night that was a pretty good talk. I forget who it was talking, which guest we had, but it was really quiet the whole time. It was like you could barely hear us, like, at all. The entire time it was really, really quiet, and it was just kind of impossible for people. But that happens, and the next episode's fine. Okay, so that's what we're doing today. Couple of announcements. I have a talk I just did with Stellium 7, Mike Wilkinson, who's going to be joining us more regularly, hopefully soon, doing some talks on biogeology, titanology. We just did an interview with him about his new book coming out. While I'm here, I figure I could show you a link that you guys can pick up on. Let me click on my display capture button, sources, properties, standard window, which window? There we go. Boom. Okay. Guys, see this? Great. The Hacker Prince, a true story. The true stories of the misadventures of a clever teen 80s hacker and his hapless foray into the secret world of the elite hackers. Another interesting thing, if you do criminal list of computer criminals. Check this out. All right, 1986, computer intruder hacker. Boom. Let's go to the top. List of computer criminals. And you might have heard some of these guys like Julian Assange or Kevin Mitnick, at least. You guys know who Assange is, right? Arrested in 1996. Had to pay a little fine. Let's go back a little bit. Number 1 on the list. Mike Princeton Wilkerson. 7th of May, 1986. What? This is a whole 10 years before Julian Assange. And he had to serve jail for a fortnight, which isn't the worst thing, but you don't want to be in jail at all. And 200 hours of community service in the best way possible. Guys, I know it sounds horrible, but trust me, you couldn't imagine a better thing. What did he do? Nothing. Just 4 counts of illegal computer trespassing to computers at Microsoft, Sundstrand Corporation, which was founded in 1926 and merged, Data Control, Kensworth Truck Company. And I just recently looked into that trucking game. What's it called? By the way, isn't there like a little window? Yes, let's do that so everyone thinks I'm cool. By the way, I just looked into this game, Truck Simulator 2022 and Farm Simulator 22. Both amazing games. Makes you realize trucking and farming are very important Midwestern activities. Anyway, there's this other thing. And Resource Conservation Company, no big thing there, but it turns out it was a subsidiary of Boeing. So military industrial complex meets boy who didn't mean to do nothing wrong. Just a little, I think they call it the techno joyride or something like that. But you're going to want to look into Mike. You're going to want to check out the Hacker Prince. You can get a digital copy. You can get a physical copy. You can even get a hardback. And there's an audiobook version as well, read by the author, which is going to be amazing because he's got a great voice. This is the Hacker Man, Mike P. Wilkerson. So definitely, I just wanted to plug this because it's really exciting. I can't stress enough, it's not just that it's exciting to me. This is really important to the world to know the story of how technology works, how hacking works, what happened to people who first started figuring out how computers work, and why we have these systems of control now that it's really about this guy. They tried to shut him down, they tried to shut the rest of us down, make him an example. And today we're still living in this post phone freaking post-hacking world. Yeah, and you can check out his art. He does amazing art as well. I mean, Mike's a cool guy in a lot of ways. Definitely, though, you're going to want to go to the Stellium channel, check out some of his videos. He has a bunch of things on biogeology, on titanology, on important stuff, on heartstones, etc. Now, there was something I thought that was kind of interesting. Bad Guys is this movie that just came out recently, and it's about these characters who look bad because they're sharks and wolves and Hunter S. Thompson as a snake or whatnot, but they turn out to actually be the good guys. And the bad guys are not, they try to do this thing where they clean up their act. Let me try it again. But the guy who's trying to help them clean up their act, who I feel like is the voice of what's that little dog? Rocco's Modern Life. It sounds like that kind of thing. He's a guinea pig, and he's the good guy all around. But get this, the good guy who looks like the good guy turns out to be the bad guy, and the bad guys turn out to be the good guys. And I hope that's not too big of a spoiler for you, but that's how that works in life. But the other thing is Hunter S. Thompson as a snake. You're gonna need to see this movie probably. Grab something that'll calm you down to watch a kid's movie. I don't know, like your Teddy or something. But it's worth it, I promise, because you get that idea of the most important thing here is it's hard to see that heart there. There's a heart stone in this movie, right? And I don't know if I can find a picture of it. I wish there was a picture of it. That'd be great. Well, this is the closest I can find. Right behind him is a statue of him holding up this meteorite that's been launched out of a volcano, and it's shaped like a heart. You can only see the base of it here. But it's a heart stone, and the whole movie centers around this heist to get the heart stone. So that's pretty sweet. Boom, let me get down the display capture. Cool. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. What's up, Elron from Netherlands, and Nicholas is there as well. I'll just say, and let me jump into some of my content. So I have a bunch of, I remember I had all of these tabs open that I'm still trying to go through. Let's go to the beginning of this. Let me go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, maybe 8. Let's go into 8. I think we started with this last time, or we ended with this last time. Have I really met Alex Jones? Well, there are videos of me with Alex Jones on this channel. So, I am really good at CGI, but I've met and had interactions, pluralized, with Alex Jones. Native tongue. Okay. Let me go to this display capture and change the window to this one, and we're good. Okay, so 12er Shi'ism, also known as the Imamiyya, is the largest branch of Shia Islam, comprised of about 85% of all Shia Muslims. So I was talking to my dad recently about some of this stuff, and he was saying that when he was in Afghanistan, I think it could have been another one of the countries, but when he was over there, it might have been in Syria, that there was a group that were associated with Ali, who believed that Ali was the new Mahdi. And, that was that last time we talked this idea that there's a Muslim new coming, like a Christ, almost like a second coming, like the Mahdi is going to be this like helpful figure, and the Mahdi. And they believed that one of the relatives of Muhammad, probably Ali, was, or maybe his great-grandson would be, the Mahdi. And so the Mahdi was supposed to have all of these certain rules about them, and they were waiting for him to come. But simultaneously, some of the family members of Muhammad started to say, well, I want my grandkid or son to be the Mahdi. So what I'll do is I'll name him all the right things and raise him in all the right places, and I will manufacture the prophecy. Okay? And by manufacturing the prophecy, they could say, hey, look, this guy fits all the qualifications for the second coming of the Muslim equivalent to Christ. And again, it's a little different because it's kind of its own Gnostic sect. And that's something we talked about the last few episodes is Gnosticism, Christianity, Islam, how closely intersectional they were at this time, and even still are by some degree. Now, if you imagine how Gnosticism has been passive for so long, it's mainly because it's not been the most powerful group in the communities or civilization that it's in comprised of. Gnosticism ends up being kind of a secret within churches. But if Gnosticism had been the going religion of any place, which we'll show you today has been the case several times, when it has happened, it victimizes the same people and is complicit in the same crimes as any other monopoly religion. It becomes an authoritative religion the same way. Now, Islam is essentially a Gnostic sect that believes in Christ as a prophet, etc., and a very good man, etc. There's a lot of really good things there, but it's about gnosis. It's about knowledge and wisdom and doing things a certain way, and it deviates from the Apostle Paul in a lot of ways. It tries to focus in a lot of ways similar to Gnosticism. One of the main differences, someone might say, well, it looks different. Not so much that the qualities and attributes are different, but it looks different. Why? Well, because Gnosticism is peaceful so often. You've got a group of monks and they're chilling. Compare that to Islam. Islam, you don't think of as just, granted in Indonesia, they've got pacifist Islamics, but there are also a number of really violent sects that believe in forcing the Mahdi, forcing the future of Islam into the world stage, globalizing Islam. So you could say that's more, that doesn't distinguish Islam. That just distinguishes authority as a religion and what happens. So the Twelvers share many tenets with other Shia sects, such as the belief in imams. The imams are an Islamic leadership position. For Sunni Muslims, imam is most commonly used as the title of worship leader of a mosque. In this context, imams may lead Islamic worship services, lead prayers, serve as community leaders, and provide religious guidance. So it's kind of a form of episcopos. You could very similarly say that there are groups of hierarchy in this church, and it's not just a horizontal organization. Even though there are sects that we've shown that are. In rejecting the possibility of abrogation of Sharia laws, Twelvers are also distinguished from Ismailis by their belief in Muhammad's status as the seal of the prophet, and in considering both esoteric and exoteric aspects of the Quran. Alevis in Turkey and Albania and Alawites in Syria and Lebanon share the belief in the 12 imams with Twelvers, but their theological doctrines are markedly different. So there's some interesting things about the Twelvers. The Twelver is based on a belief that 12 male descendants from the family of Muhammad, starting with Ali ibn Abi Talib and ending with Muhammad al-Mahdi, are imams who have religious and political authority. And this is a big thing about this idea of authority and authority over the church and how this control came over. We can look into Jafar al-Sadiq. Jafar the Truthful was an 8th century Muslim scholar. He was the founder of the Jafari school of jurisprudence and the 6th Imam of the Twelvers and Ismaili Shia. The traditions recorded from al-Sadiq and his predecessor al-Bakr are said to have been more numerous than all the hadiths preserved from the Islamic prophet and other Shia imams combined. Among other theological contributions, he elaborated the doctrine of Nas, divinely inspired designation of each imam by the previous imam, and Ishma, the infallibility of the imams, as well as that of the Taqiyya. So if you think about this also, the Ishma idea, it's very similar to the incorruptible innocence of, priests. We think of a lot of time priests having this, even though we know better. But popes are known to be the highest priest, who is the most infallible because they are the word of God, etc. This imams have a very similar concept, as well as that of the Taqiyya. And you have to remember, before the Pope, he was simply the one of the bishops, right? The Archbishop of Rome. So there were a number of other bishops, and it was not just Greece, Rome, Istanbul, or Constantinople. There was also the Church of the East, like we talked about last time or the time before, I can't remember, and the Orthodox and the Coptics, and there would have been 6 to 12 who considered themselves to be the high bishops of their churches, the archbishops of their particular congregations. Al-Sadiq is also important to Sunnis as the jurist and transmitter of the hadith, and a teacher to the Sunni scholars Abu Hanifa and Malik ibn Anas, who founded the Hanafi and Maliki schools of Sunni jurisprudence, respectively. Al-Sadiq also figures prominently in the initiatic ritual chains of many Sufi orders. A wide range of religious and scientific works were attributed to him, though no work penned by Al-Sadiq remain extant. So we look at 702, this idea that, 702, and also this calendar system, the Hijra year, this is this idea of the years counted after Muhammad. So there's another calendar system designed around, and we'll go into this as something that's important, is the calendar year of the Hijri, or Hijri, I think it's Hijri, al-Hijri. It's the era for the Islamic lunar calendar. And that really matters when you start to find out about how things changed in the quote 700s or in the 16th, 17th century by the Jesuits. There is there's an interesting way that you can start to break down the chronological discrepancies just by using the lunar calendar compared to the Gregorian calendar. You start to find out intersections in history. So that's one thing. We talked about Jafar. You might want to talk about the Imam. His father, Al-Sadiq was about 37 when his father, Al-Bakir, died and designated him as the next Imam. He held the imamate for at least 28 years. His imamate coincided with a crucial period in Islamic history. He witnessed both the overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate by the Abbasids in the mid-8th century and later the Abbasids' prosecution of their former Shia allies against the Umayyads. The leadership of the Shia was also disputed amongst its different factions. So this is a really important period because we think of Islam as post Umayyad, right? Everything that happened because of the Abbasids changed this Persian empire that really extended into Asia and included Slavic lands and a lot of Slavic Arabs that were technically Arab by nation, but not by religion. Well, and that's the other thing. By religion, even, is such an abstract concept at this point because we're talking about Gnosticism up until the 7th century. So these groups that are saying, well, we are technically a form of Christian, or we're a modern spiritual school of thought that is connected to Judeo-Christian thought. So and believed in this idea of tolerance or peace and submission to the way of God as opposed to the way of choice. So violence starts to really appear in Islam after the 7th century, and you start to notice this especially under the Abbasids. Under the Umayyad rulers are often described by Muslim historians as corrupt, irreligious, and treacherous. So do your math there, right? These guys the Umayyads did not help the Muslims take over the society. You could call them corrupt, you could call our society corrupt, it is. But it's important to remember that this is a perspective of a group that has really benefited from their overthrow. The widespread political and social dissatisfaction with the Umayyad Caliphate was spearheaded by the Prophet's extended family, who were seen by Muslims as God-inspired leaders in their religious struggle to establish justice over impiety. Al-Sadiq's imamate extended over the latter half of the Umayyad Caliphate, which was marked by many, often Shia revolts, and eventually witnessed the violent overthrow of the Umayyads by the Abbasids, the descendants of the Prophet's paternal uncle Al-Abbas. And that's interesting. Abbas is the father. You could go into the Hebrew roots of words because there is a, even though we talk about Hebrew as a dead language, it's fascinating, and we'll get David Plate from MK Ultrasound to come talk sometime more about how Hebrew has been reconstructed, because it's not really that it's a dead language. It's more that mathematics, algebra, have replaced the language of one nation by creating a new nation. It's a nation. That sounds so much different than I mean it to. But it exists in multiple spheres of influence. Mathematics has influenced every group across the world. And so it's interesting, we were talking also with Ewan Jr. about coins that had Arab writing on them, but we all know that coins have Arab numbers on them because very quickly the number system replaced Western tally systems that were being used. So we know that Arab numbers, where did they come from? We'll start to look into Sanskrit, start to look into Hebrew number systems, and you'll see most of Hebrew language is based on numerics and numerology. So the period under the Abbasid rulers, the years of transition from the Umayyads to the Abbasids, was a period of weak central authority, allowing al-Sadiq to teach freely. Some 4,000 scholars are thus reported to have studied under al-Sadiq. Among them were Abu Hanifa and Malik ibn Anas, founders of the Hanafi and Maliki school of Islam. And we talked a bit, we mentioned that these guys existed, and we can look into Hanafi, I think actually would be correct to look into. So you can see this was a period of Islamic tolerance to an extent, but really this is the beginning. So you don't see the tax system really start to bother people yet, and it's very, any of the enemies are removed very quickly. Al-Sadiq remained passive. Let's go a little bit up higher actually. The Abbasids considered al-Sadiq a potential threat to their rule. As the ruler of a politically quiet branch of the Shia, he was summoned by al-Mansur to Baghdad, but was reportedly able to convince the caliph to let him stay in Medina by quoting the hadith. The man who goes away to make a living will achieve his purpose, but he who sticks to his family will prolong his life. Al-Sadiq remained passive in 762. In the 762 to the failed uprising of his nephew, Muhammad al-Nafs al-Sakiya. Nevertheless, he was arrested and interrogated by al-Mansur and held in Samarra near Baghdad before being allowed to return to Medina. His house was burned by order of the al-Mansur, though he was unharmed. And there are reports of multiple arrests and attempts on his life by the caliph. So here's the beginning of distrust for this Gnostic group that say that they are not just Gnostics, that they believe specifically in their prophet and that he's coming through and he's the epicenter of Islam. In fact, the word Islam, like meta, we're going to own it, you know. Al-Sadiq married Fatima. We talked about that before, with whom he had two sons, Ishmael, the sixth Ismaili Imam, and Abdullah was the eldest son. Al-Sadiq died of poisoning at 64 or 65, poisoned at the instigation of al-Mansur. According to the Tabatabai, an Iranian scholar and theorist. Interesting, we should save him. He was buried in the al-Baqi cemetery in Medina. After his death, the secession, his following fractured, and the largest group, who came to be known as the Twelvers, followed his younger son, Musa al-Qadim. And so this begins the violent period in so many ways. And we wonder, why is there a violent school of thought in Islam? Well, again, you got people poisoning and burning down houses, so it's not that they're inventing the distinction of violence. They're just saying, no, we shouldn't just be completely peaceful. It's not working out. But because it works too well not to be peaceful, it works best in their circumstance to be aggressive, then they take over the house of Muhammad and in a lot of ways become centric to our understanding of Islam today. Meanwhile, there are a lot of things that are beneficial about al-Sadiq, including their interest in mysticism, predominantly through Sufism. Al-Sadiq holds a special prominence among Sufi orders. A number of early Sufi figures are associated with Al-Sadiq. He is praised in Sufi literature for his knowledge of the Tariqat path, and numerous sayings and writings about the spiritual progress are ascribed to Al-Sadiq in Sufi circles. Al-Sadiq is also viewed as the head of the Sufi line of saints and mystics by the Sufi writer Abu Nayyam and Farid al-Din Attar. Attar praised Al-Sadiq as the one who spoke more than the other imams concerning the Tariqat. who excelled in writings on innermost mysteries and truths, and who was matchless in expounding the subtleties and secrets of revelation. However, some of the material attributed to al-Sadiq in the Sufi literature is said to be apocryphal. Amongst others, the Shia Muqaddas Ardabili has thus dismissed the alleged links between al-Sadiq and Sufism as an attempt to gain the authority of al-Sadiq for Sufi teachings. So this is, I mean, that's fascinating. Like, it could easily be that they lied about it to say, hey, your dad was interested in the stuff, so you can't kill us. That's totally hard to argue. However, from my understanding, the quotes attributed to him, granted, this is such a long time ago. Let me just see if I can pull up a quote somewhere. Quotes. Is that working? Jafar al-Sadiq quotes. Here we go. So as for no, oh God, thine is the praise that I give thee. No, there's some really good ones. I hadn't prepared to look through. It makes no sense at all if people consider the one who lacks knowledge and science as a prosperous person. Everything has its tax, and the tax of knowledge is to teach its people. Precision, accuracy, and pondering and wisdom in sciences will nourish and develop a person's brain. So there are some, you get this beginning period of intellectualism in Islam, and in mysticism's connections to intellectualism and science. And that's when we ask, why does that exist? Well, we could say it was al-Sadiq, and that's an important thought, but then here we're hearing all this stuff about apocrypha. So is it possible that some of this stuff was just pseudonymed for the purpose of making Islam more accepting of Sufism, of Sufi traditions that were popular to Platonic students, of scholastic Platonic students in Persia, in Iran? And it looks like that's a fair thing to ask, and I think that is a likely thing. But regardless, because of this, during the period following of the Mahdi, most mysticism starts to be crushed, except for the highly Muhammadan al-Sadiq Sufi schools. And all of a sudden, they say, well, because of this, we're allowed to bring in Europeans and Africans and Chinese, just pay them to live here, and we'll study them, because it's important to have knowledge, and great is man who has knowledge. And we then can connect Islam with this period of combining all these ideas, of combining all these technological achievements, of different forms of architecture and of textiles. And that's the benefit of al-Sadiq and of Sufism, in its connection. We mentioned Hanafi as one of the four traditional major Sunni schools. Its eponym in the 8th century, Kufan scholar Abu Hanifa and An Numan ibn Tabit. Oh no, that's his whole name, I guess. It's just a really nice long name there. A Tabi of Persian origin whose legal views were preserved primarily by his two most important figures, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani, who was the father of Muslim international law. So again, here we start to learn more about law and its control mechanisms, but religious law, saying God's law, to control people, saying this is not something that can be voted upon. This is something that's so complicated that the wisest people need to spend their whole lives trying to just discover the truth behind God's law. It's not something that we can build. It's something that we have to unveil. And they began using, so Hanafi Usul recognizes, or Usul is the principles of Islamic jurisprudence, also known as the Usul al-Fiqh, are traditional methodological principles used in Islamic jurisprudence for deriving the rulings of Islamic law. So this is, an important thing. It needs to exist. You have to have court systems. You will have criminals, but theirs interestingly uses this Gnostic text of the Quran and hadith, consensus, ijma, legal analogy, qiyas, and jurisprudence, istithan, and normative customs, urf, as sources of the Sharia. And Sharia, scary word, just means law, or the religious laws that form parts of the Islamic tradition. So Sharia matters. Abu Hanifa is just regarded by modern scholars as the first to formally adopt and institute qiyas as the method to derive Islamic laws when the Quran and Hadith are silent or ambiguous in their guidance, and is noted for his general reliance on personal opinion. Nevertheless, the usage of Ra'i as one of the sources of their jurisprudence, Ra'i, I guess, is Al-Ra'i was an early Islamic movement advocating the use of reasoning at arriving at legal decisions. We're going to have to look into that. Nevertheless, the usage of Ra'i as one of the sources of the jurisprudence, the Hanafite scholars still prioritize the textual approach of the Sahaba for their jurisprudence. So, making Islamic law and where it spread to, you can start to see the popularity spread specifically from Persia into the Middle East. And the Middle East was part and parcel to this concept, but it starts to become the Maliki once you get into Africa, because Africa has an entirely different set of rules as a conquered place. The revolution that happens in Islam tends to happen around Iran, so it's got enough people that are familial to this and have transgressed out of Zoroastrianism or Manichaeism into Islam as this train of thought. It makes sense. It's sort of, you can see how it bleeds together so naturally you barely notice the change. When that happens, though, begins this idea of the Al-Ra'i, advocating common sense or rational discretion. Early Islamic movements advocated the use of reasoning to arrive at legal decisions. They are one of three main groups debating sources of Islamic law in the 2nd century of Islam. The other two being the Al-Kalam, speculative theologians, and Ashab al-Hadith, the partisan of Hadith, who eventually prevailed. Its proponents, which included many early jurists of the Hanafi school, used the term Ra'i to refer to sound or considered reasoning, such as the qiyas, analogical deductions. Their opponents from the al-Hadith movement held that the Quran and authentic Hadith were the only admissible sources of Islamic law and objected to use of any Ra'i in jurisprudence, whether the form of qiyas, istilah, consideration of public interest, or hiyal, legal subterfuges. According to Daniel W. Brown, al-Ra'i thought a hadith should sometimes be subject to other overriding principles, such as the continuous practice of the Ummah, Muslim community, and general principles of equity, which better represented the spirit of the Prophet of Islam. Over time, the Hanafi and the Maliki jurists gradually came to accept the primacy of the Quran and Hadith, advocated by the Al-Hadith movement, restricting the use of other forms of legal reasoning to interpretation of these scriptures. In turn, Hanbali jurists, who had led the Al-Hadith movement, gradually came to accept the use of qiyas as long as its application was strictly founded on scriptural sources. So here we move away from fighting and full fundamentalism by saying, well, we can use the quotes from the scripture as common law, and if it was good enough for Muhammad, it should be good now. And that begins this idea of Muslim law. We'll talk about this guy. Muhammad Hussein Tabatabai was an Iranian scholar, theorist, philosopher, and one of the most prominent thinkers of modern Shia Islam. He is perhaps best known for his Tafsir al-Mizan, a 27-volume work of Tafsir Quranic exegesis, which he produced between 1954 and 1972. He is commonly known as Al-Ameh Tabatabai, and the Al-Ameh Tabatabai University in Tehran is named after him. He received his earliest education in the native city of Tabriz. He studied with Henry Corbin and Sayyid Hossein Nasir. Here we go. In which not only the classical texts of divine wisdom and gnosis were discussed, but also the whole cycle of what Nasir calls comparative gnosis, in which each session and sacred text of one of the major religions containing mystical and Gnostic teachings, such as the Upanishads, the Tao Te Ching, the Gospel of John, and the Gospel of John, were discussed and compared with Sufism and Islamic Gnostic doctrines in general. Tabatabai was a philosopher, a prolific writer, and an inspiring teacher to his students who devoted much of their life to Islamic studies. Many of his students were among the ideological founders of the Islamic Republic of Iran, namely Morteza Motahari, Muhammad Beheshti, and Muhammad Mofate. Others like Sayyid Hussein Nasir and Hassanzadeh Amoli remained and continued their studies in the intellectual non-political sphere. So again, you see right there's clear connections with Gnosticism and Islam, and they're even aware of it in certain circumstances. The West is aware of it as well. Let's see. Published works consider the Reviver of Khams Haza in the organizational sense, and the magnum opus Mula Sadra. Yeah, there you go. Look into poetry. Ismail ibn Jafar. We were talking about this. The community split. Half of the community of the Twelvers passed to Musa ibn Jafar, and the other half to Ismail ibn Jafar. So this is kind of another important moment in Islam, is this split. It's a familial split. It's kind of similar to what happened with the Book of Mormon. The Mormon split. You have Brigham Young, and you have, when Joseph Smith dies, one of, not the main wife of Joseph Smith, makes her son, Joseph Smith's son, but her son the president of the church, and that becomes the reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints. So kind of similar here. You start to see these divisions going on between the organizational structure of Islam. It was initially thought that the elder son, Jafar al-Sadiq, either the first or second son of the wife Fatima bint al-Hussein, would be the next imam, arguably found in both Ishmael and the 12 sources. However, his untimely death prior to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq's death led to multiple splits and theories within the community. What came to be known as the Ismailis are those who believe that the imamate should remain with the line of Ismaili Jafar. It was believed that the designation went to Ismaili ibn Jafar, and therefore the imamate should continue through his lineage. So even though he's dead, they wanted his kid to be in charge of the organization, the grandkid, whereas there was a living relative that they felt like he should have taken over because he was the closest to at least knowing that school of thought, being an extant member of that school of thought before he was, born. This guy just recently born. What is he gonna know? The Ithna Asharis following the early death of Ismail ibn Jafar acknowledged the designation of Ibn Jafar al-Sadiq's younger son, Musa al-Kazim, from his slave wife, Hamida al-Barbaria. Okay, well, there you go. Barbar, right there, is in the title, so we know that this was a Tatar or Berber. Various hadith reports from the 12-verse Shia collection contain narration about the designation of Imam Musa al-Kazim, along with his exceptional character and wisdom from an early age. Witnesses include some of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq's sons, Ali and Ishaq, who affirmed Musa al-Kazim's nas. Other arguments made for Imam Musa al-Kazim include the passing down of special objects that belonged to the Prophet, Ali and Fatima, to the designated imams. While the early followers, the late Twelvers of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, believed that Ismail ibn Jafar might have been the imam due to his beloved status by his father, some argue that he was neither explicitly designated nor meant to be due to his early death. Another mainstream view also purports a change or abrogation in the divine decree known as the Bada, in which God may abrogate a previous decree for something better. Nice. As a result, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq's infallibility is not called into question. The Ithna Ashari continued to follow the imamate from Musa al-Kazim's lineage until their 12th imam went into occultation. They awaited their 12 imams as the final Mahdi. So that began the school of Muhammad ibn Ismail. let's see. The majority of Ismaili followed his descendants through his son, Ahmed al-Wafi, Abdullah ibn Muhammad. His descendants further founded the Fatimid dynasty, later called the Nizari and Mustafali. Okay, so here's, again, this idea that the mother's line matters and the matriarchy and kind of like the reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints. Imam Muhammad ibn Imam Ishmael can be considered the first proper Ishmaeli Imam, since Imam Ishmael ibn Jafar predeceased his father Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, and thus was able to act independently of previous Imams from his call. From him came all the Ishmaeli Imams and subsequent subsects of Ishmaeli and its offshoots. So it's all about Imam Muhammad ibn Imam Ishmael, if you can remember that name. And that's 740 AD. So you can see this is not happening over centuries. This is literally happening in just a generation or two, the changeover. And you hear about it 100 years later, or, and this is great, 842 or 1438. You do the math on that one. Flamenco timeline for those who are new. His father, Imam Ismaili, died during the lifetime of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. We saw this. So we'll move on. Hamdan Karmat was the eponymous founder of the Cremation sect of Ishmaelism. There we go. Okay. Originally the chief Ishmaeli missionary in Lower Iraq in 899, he quarreled with the movement's leadership at Salamaya after it was taken over by Sayyid ibn al-Hussein, the future first Fatimid caliph, and with his followers broke off from them. Hamdan then disappeared, but his followers continued their existence in the Syrian desert in Al-Bahran for several decades. Okay, so century after Islam, you got these organizations fighting again. The Cremations are continuing their belief in Persian mysticism, and they get in trouble, but they're able to continue their beliefs in Syria, and I believe later on in India or Pakistan, southwestern India and Pakistan. The Hamdan's early life is unknown, except that he came from the village of Al-Dur in the district of Farat in east of Kufa. He was originally an ox driver. Okay, so it's like the taxi driver of the time. His surname Karmat is considered as being probably of Aramaic origin. So we also know there's a connection there between the Tartarians and the Aramaic, and this idea of language, of culture, and of mysticism and of gnosis being connected. His name Karmata, Red-Eyed, Al-Nabakti, and Nizam al-Mulk all provide diminutive of Karmatuya. Others suggest that his name meant short-legged. It is traditionally considered that Hamdan's followers were named the Karmita, men of Karma, after him. However, the 12 Shia scholars Al-Fadl ibn Shadan, who died in 873 to 874, is known to have written a refutation of Cremation doctrines. This means that either Hamdan had become active several years before the date recorded in the sources, or alternatively that he took his surname from the sect rather than the other way around. So it's more likely that his name was first, that these books were published, copies later, because the original versions were destroyed, because the only thing that we have as a record is a refutation on the book until we get to the Syrian copies. He had missionary activity. He was sent by the Ismaili leadership of Salamaya, and when he died, Hamdan assumed the leadership of Ismaili missionary activity in the rural environs of Kufa and southern Iraq. He soon moved his residence to the town of Kalwada, south of Baghdad, and rapidly won many new converts amongst the peasantry and the Bedouin. His success was aided by the turmoil of the time. The Abbasid Caliphate was enfeebled, and Iraq was in chaos due to the Zani revolt. At the same time, the mainstream 12 Shia adherents were becoming increasingly dissatisfied due to the political quietism of their leadership, as well as by the vacuum left by the death of the 11th Imam Hassan al-Aqsari, which we could look into, and the supposed occultation of the 12 Imam. Muhammad al-Mahdi in 874. In this climate, the millennialism of the Ismailis who preached the imminent return of the Messiah or the Mahdi was very attractive to the dissatisfied Twelvers. Okay, so now you've got the beginning of people saying, there's something wrong with this thing that was supposed to be the solution. So, but it can't be wrong. So what it has to be is that it's about to change, and the apocalypse, the end is near. It's a very Paulatian thing that starts to happen. And subsequent history of the Cremation movement. After Hamdan's disappearance, the term Cremations was retained by all Ismailis who refused to recognize the claims of Said and subsequently of the Fatimid dynasty. At times, it was also applied by non-Ismailis in a pejorative sense to the supporters of the Fatimids as well. Abu Muhammad was murdered in the same year at the instigation of Zakaria ibn Mirdawaya, apparently on the instruction of a Salmiya. Hamdan and Abu Muhammad's followers threatened to kill Zakaria, who himself was forced to hide. The Da'is appointed by Abu Muhammad then resumed their work, denounced the claims of Said in Salmiya, and continued the Cremation movement, although Abu Muhammad was often cited as the source of their religious and philosophical works. A Cremation movement, the so-called Baklaya, survived in Lower Iraq for several decades thereafter, with their teachings ascribed largely to Abu Muhammad. In the Syrian desert and Lower Iraq, Zechariah soon assumed the initiative, at first covertly, through his sons. Zechariah sponsored a great uprising in Syria in 902 to 903 that was brought to an end in the Battle of Hama in November 903. Although probably designed to bring about a pro-Fatimid revolution, the large-scale Abbasid reaction it precipitated, and the attention it brought on him forced Said to abandon Salmiya for the Maghreb, where he would found the Fatimid state in Ifriqiya. Zechariah himself emerged in the open in 906, claiming to be the Mahdi, to lead the last Cremation attacks on the Abbasids in Iraq before being defeated and captured early next year. The Cremations had more success in Bahrain, where Abu Sa'id al-Janabi, who had been sent to the region in 886-887 by Hamdan and Abu Muhammad, founded an independent Cremation state and became a major threat to the Abbasids in the 10th century. Other Cremation groups existed independently in Yemen, Ravi, and Khorasan. Okay, so then we'll look into, was this it? Here, let me jump a little to this group. The Baklaya, or the Buraniya, were a subgroup of Cremations that were active in southern Iraq in the early 10th century. The group emerged after the defeat of the Cremation revolt at Zechariah al-Mirawai. Zechariah died, but many of his followers in the Sawad, the fertile rural region around Kufa, believed that he was not dead and would return to lead them. In 907-908, a Da'i, an Ismaili missionary, called Abu Hatim al-Zuti, was active in the Sawad and prohibited his followers from eating garlic, leeks, and turnips, slaughtering animals, and following certain customary Islamic religious observances. From this, his followers, they derived the nickname Baklaya, which soon was used to generally refer to the Cremations of the Sawad. The followers of Zechariah were soon joined by the followers of Hamdan Karmat and Abu Muhammad Abdan, who still believed in the return of Muhammad ibn Ismail as the Mahdi. This movement survived and even staged a few uprisings against the Abbasids in areas around Kufa and Vasit under Masud ibn Hurath and Abu Muhammad Abdan's nephew Isa ibn Musa. When the Cremations of Bahrain under Abu Tir al-Janabi invaded Iraq in 927, they rose in revolt, but were defeated by the Abbasid general. Their banners were described as being white, with inscriptions from Quran on the redemption of the Israelites. Wait, let's go that again. Their banners are described as being white, with inscriptions from the Quran on the redemption of the Israelites from the oppression of Pharaoh. Okay. A number of Cremations of Persian origin then joined the Bahranis and then followed them to the homeland, where they became the Ajamijun. Okay, so right there, that's interesting. Like the connection there between Cremations and the Kamal Ali's monastery and Israel, as we talked about Ishmael and Israel and the Bedouin, because I think the Bedouin, the Ishmaelite that Moses marries is a Bedouin, and that's at least in the Josephus narrative. So ajam is the Arabic word for mute. It refers to someone whose mother tongue is not Arabic. In other words, you say they can't speak because they can't speak Arabic. So this clearly says that Arabic is today the most important language, but there are a lot of people who couldn't speak it. And how did they deal with them? Well, they just said they couldn't speak at all. They were mute. So there's definitely something to be said about this transition into Arabic. It's not the original language, but it is a language that's very important. There's a number of different aspects to Arabic that have been changed as it's been appropriated. And we talked about the Kufa script before. Let's pull up Kufa again. There's different kinds of Arabic scripts. Let's see, the Kufic. There we go. The Kufic script, which we looked at with Ewing Jr. Here's Muhammad, written in this QR code-like language. This is Surah of Monotheism, read clockwise, starting at the bottom left. Okay, so I think you go, you go that way. Okay. So very interesting how this language has emerged and turned itself into this swirled font language, that we're more familiar with now. So we can look into how that started to happen. Hassan al-Aqsari was a 9th century Muslim scholar and theologian. He's considered the 11th Imam in the 12-verse Shia Islam, superseding his father Ali al-Hadi and preceding his son Muhammad al-Mahdi. He is also an important figure to the Sunni and Sufi. I think there's something missing here about the soldier. Yeah, Hassan the soldier. Okay, so this is where you start to see the change of Islam into, we talked about the century earlier, and the 8th century becomes very violent, but my word, the 9th century is where Islam goes the most intense. And you start to, this is not very different from, of course, there's a reason why the Christians who had Jesuit militant groups and the Islamics who had militant groups were interacting with each other, because they were both military groups that were religious. So it's not a distinguishment to make them, to say that this is what is unique about them, but it is a distinction to say this is a period where Islam starts to transition out of being simply, a way of dealing with the state powers and the familial powers and even legal systems trying to deal with the law. Everything starts to change into being more violent. And this isn't the culmination of violence, because we don't really see the culmination of Islamic violence until the 11th century. But you'll start to notice here that they start taking over people's properties. They start saying, well, everyone needs to join in on this prayer time. Everyone has to face the same direction, because of that one battle that we were all in, where we had to face the same direction to pray. And 5 times a day, if you're not praying 5 times a day, why is God working for you 6 times a week or whatever it is? So they made all these rules, and the rules start to really force themselves on people. You also see someone saying when he died at 28 that they thought it was natural causes. Probably not. Some Shia sources link that he was poisoned at the instigation of Abbasid Caliph al-Mu'tamid. That's the version I'm familiar with, and died on the 8th Rabi al-Awwal in the house in Samar, and was buried with his father. So the idea of being murdered, pretty likely. They thought that all Shia Imams will be killed by someone else, so that it is believed that al-Aqsari was poisoned. Some people think that maybe that's just too logical, and so therefore it couldn't have happened. But I'm pretty sure he was poisoned. When the news of al-Aqsari's illness reached Caliph al-Mu'tamid, he sent a physician and a group of his trusted men to observe the Imam's condition. After the death of the Imam, they had all his female slaves examined by the midwives. For 2 years, they searched for the successor of the Imams until they eventually lost hope. Al-Aqsari died on the very same day that his young son, Muhammad, al-Mahdi, who was then 5 or a little over, disappeared and started what was henceforth known as the minor occultation. So let's go into that for a second. The minor occultation. Oh, first, let's just read this further on. 12 Shiites believed the birth of al-Aqsari's son, like that of the prophet, was like that of the prophet Moses, and was concealed due to the difficulties of the time because of the belief that the son was the promised Muhammad al-Mahdi, an important figure in Shia teachings. The Mahdi was believed to be destined to reappear before the end of time to fill the world with justice, peace, and to establish Islam as the global religion. Al-Aqsari's death coincided with the beginning of the Imamate period of Mahdi. Jafar al-Zaki, al-Aqsari's brother, claimed that his brother had never had a son. It was said that when Jafar al-Zaki was about to say the prayer at his brother's funeral, there appeared a fair child with curly hair. Now, fair child, we can start to say this guy was Berber looking, right? And we talked about that earlier. Shining teeth, who seized Jafar's cloak and insisted on saying the prayer. A few days later, a group of Shia pilgrims from Qom, ignorant of his death, came to visit al-Aqsari. The same Jafar claimed to be the next Imam. The pilgrims said that they would accept him if he could prove himself by telling them their names and indicating how much money they had. Interesting, of all things. While Jafar was protesting the examination, a servant of Hassan, al-Aqsari's son, appeared, saying that his master had sent him to inform them of their particular names and their specific amounts of money. Jafar searched everywhere but could not find the boy. The doctrine of his Gaibah declares, the doctrine of his Gaibah, which is the eschatological belief that the Mahdi, a cultivated male descendant of Islamic, had already been born and will emerge with Jesus, declared that simply the Mahdi had been withdrawn by God from the eyes of men, that his life had been miraculously prolonged, and that he had been seen from time to time and had been in correspondence with others, and maintains a control over the fortunes of his people. So, okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I guess the first thing to say is there's clearly people looking for a Mahdi descendant. This kid shows up. He's the son of a slave lady, but he'd been a slave lady that was married. So there's a lot of reasons why it could have been him. But the main thing here with this kid could predict how much money they had in their pockets and their names. I mean, A, that's the easiest thing, because then you just find those things out. Someone tells you them and he knows it. But B, those are dumb things to ask if you got access to a prophet. You know what I mean? So, whatever, but Sunni do not believe the Mahdi was already born. But there is a group of as many 40 well-known Sunni scholars, including Al-Dabi, Ibn Hajar, Abu al-Falah, Hanbali, and al-Kunduzi, who believe that he was the son of Hassan. In 648 or 1250 AD, the Syrian Shafi author Muhammad. This is pretty funny to me, by the way, that they'll put after Muhammad, right, after Hijra era, Hijri, but they won't put the after Christ era. Are you kidding me? The Syrian Shafi author Muhammad b. Yosef al-Ganji al-Qurashi wrote al-Bayan fi Akbar. I'll just read it in English. And proving the Mahdiship of the 12 Imams using the Sunni traditions. Answering the Sunni objections to the belief that the 12 Imams was the Mahdi, Sibit ibn al-Jazi wrote Tadiq, another one, collecting hadiths from the Sunni sources about the virtues of Ali and his descendants, and at the end affirming that the 12 Imams was the expected Qaim al-Mahdi amongst Sufi circles. So he noted that some Sufi Gnostics, Dajjama Amin al-Kashaf, agreed with the Twelver doctrine about the identity of the Mahdi and his Gaba occultation. The Persian Sufi Sadir al-Din Ibrahim al-Hayyui, late 7th to 13th century, again with this, right, with the 7th or 13th century, like start looking at that, supported Twelver doctrine on the Mahdi in his Farid al-Simtan. The Egyptian Sufi al-Shanrani, while generally showing no sympathy for Shiism, affirmed in his al-Yawaqit wa Iddajari, written in 958 or 1551. Is that, like, can you beat that for evidence? That the Mahdi was a son of Imam al-Hassan al-Aqsari, born in the year 255 869, and would remain alive until his meeting with Jesus. According to the earliest reports as cited below from the official family tree documents and records, Imam Hassan al-Aqsari fathered 7 children and was survived by 6. The names of his illustrious biological children were, you get the point, some referred to as Akbar or Ashgar. And this is Ali, the Sunni Muslim saint, and yeah, an important guy. Anytime you see one of these giant, amazing architectural marvels associated with one of these guys, it turns out they were into mysticism, wouldn't you know? Occultation in Shia Islam refers to the eschatological belief that the Mahdi, a cultivated male, will be born. We looked into this. Is a popular pilgrimage site. The promised Mahdi, according to the 12 verse, once appeared and offered a prayer. Here we see the green again is an important color. Gnosticism is essentially associated with green as much as Islam is. It looks like that's where it comes from. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of these Jesus-like figures that replace not just Muhammad, but literally are, they're Jesus-like figures. Not just a prophet. Magic. So, Abdul Fadl al-Isfahani, also known as Isfahani Mahdi, was a young Persian man who lived in 931 AD and was declared to be, quote, God incarnate by the Cremation leader of Abaran, Abu Tahir al-Janabi. This new apocalyptic leader, however, caused great disruption by rejecting traditional aspects of Islam and promoting ties to, you guessed it, Zoroastrianism. Abu Tahir thought that he had identified the Mahdi as a young Persian prisoner from Isfahan by the name of Abdul Fadl al-Isfahani, who claimed to be a descendant of the Sassanid Persian kings. Al-Isfahani had been brought back to Bahrain from the Cremation's raid into Iraq in 928. In 931, Abu Tahir turned over the state to this Mahdi Caliph, said in fact to be a Zoroastrian revivalist with anti-Arab sentiments. He reinstituted the veneration of fire and engaged in burnings of religious books during an 8-day rule. Isfahani also is thought to have some links with established Zoroastrian orthodoxy as the high prince of Zoroastrians. Isfandyar Adarbad was executed by the Abbasid Caliph after being accused of complicity with Abu Tahir. His reign culminated in the execution of members of the Bahrain notable families, including members of Abu Tahir's family. Abu Tahir's mother conspired to get rid of Abu Fadl. She faked her death and sent a message to call the Mahdi to resurrect her. When he refused, he was exposed as being a normal human, and Abu Tahir's brother Said killed Abu Fadl after the Mahdi had reigned for only 8 days. Other accounts say, fearing for his own life, Abu Tahir announced that he had been wrong and denounced the al-Isfahani as a false Mahdi. Begging forgiveness from the other notables, Abu Tahir had him executed. So that didn't work out super well for him, but you can see that's the example of a few years there where people were obsessed. I don't think we're going to find... Is this it? This is the closest we're going to find is this picture here. Amazing. I love it. And I'm assuming his clothing have writing all over him that I can't read. So if you're able to read that, help me out. I'm not sure that's true. I assume so. Let's see. At Tayyib Abdul Qasim was the 21st Imam and the last Caliph of the Fatimid Caliphate. The son of the 12er Fatimid Imam who ruled over Egypt from 1101 to 1130. And here we get into this idea. I mean, it seems like this is the period they really refer to as the wild, violent time. There's a lot of peace there, too. This is when they're making peace, and they're saying, oh, these regions were violent, and we pacified them with a real opportunity for a Muslim Islamic order. Tayyib was reported to be about 2 years old at the time of Al-Amir's assassination. Al-Hafiz was appointed representative caliph on behalf of Imam Tayyib. Later, Al-Hafiz declared himself an Imam and a caliph in 528 or 1134, and Al-Tayyib was believed by the Tayyibis to be taken into hiding. Al-Tayyib and Muhammad ibn al-Hassan are descendants of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, who were considered by many groups of Shiites, respectively Tayyib, Ismailis, and Twelvers, to be occulted imams and Mahdis. So, I mean, very interesting, this whole group of people that are supposed to be prophets because they have special blood, they're of God, These are not just, this idea that Jesus is just a man, but no, these guys are essentially, because they're connected with Muhammad, they're basically God on earth. It said the guardian of Tayyib was Ibn Madan, who have hidden him in Masdar Ramah, the Mosque of Mercy. The infant son of Al-Amir was supposed to carry in a basket of reeds by Abu Turab, in which were vegetables, dishes, probably to be carried, dishes of cooked leeks and onions and carrots, and the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes which were on the bottom with the food above him. And he brought him to the cemetery, and the wet nurse suckled him in the mosque. And he concealed the matter from Al-Hafiz until the baby grew up and began to be called Kufaifa, the little basket, according to Tayyib Mustaba tradition. Before Tayyib went into the occultation, his father Al-Amir had instructed Queen Al-Hura Arwa bint Ahmed in Yemen to anoint a vicegerent after the seclusion. The Dal al-Mutlaq was the Imam's vicegerent. Did I get that right? Vicegerent had full authority to govern the community in all matters, both spiritual and temporal. Okay, so again, with this spiritually powerful person, at Tayyib, Abdul Qasim is essentially a Moses character, right? And you'll find that also interesting that it's in 1130 in Egypt. So raised in a basket. Where have we heard that before? Called Little Basket, floated down a river in a basket. So you have those Moses connections. Okay, getting into some of these other Zoroastrian-tied cults, because we're seeing how Zoroastrianism stayed alive even today. So it's amazing that it made it through. But it was part of Islam in a lot of ways, because that was the only way to make it survive, and except for in circumstances where they could build their own religion. Zurvanism, or Zarvan, is a fatalistic religious movement of Zoroastrianism, in which the divinity of Zurvan is a first principle, primordial creator deity who engendered equal but opposite twins, Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. Zurvanism is also known as Zurvanite Zoroastrianism, and may be contrasted with Mazdaism. In Zurvanism, Zurvan was perceived as the god of infinite time and space, and was Akka, one, alone. Zurvan was portrayed as a transcendental and neutral god without passion, and one for whom there was no distinction between good and evil. The name Zurvan is a normalized rendition of the word, which in Middle Persian appears as either Zurvan, I'm gonna try this again, Zuruvan, or Zarvan. The Middle Persian name derives from the Avestan Zuruvan, time, which is grammatical without gender. All the Iranians who could pronounce that better, I respect you. Although the details of the origin and developments of Zurvanism remain murky, for a summary of those three opposing opinions, see Assent and Acceptance below. We'll go to that. Just click there. Is that even a thing? Oh, there it is. Okay. It is generally accepted that Zurvanism was, 1, a branch of greater Zoroastrianism, 2, a sacerdotal response to the resolve a perceived inconsistency in the sacred text. See twin brother doctrine below. And 3, probably introduced during the second half of the Achaemenid dynasty, an ancient Persian royal dynasty that ruled over the Achaemenid Empire, an Iranian empire that stretched from Egypt to southeastern Europe into the west of the Indus Valley in the east. So we're going to go into how big of that empire it was. Let's look at it for a second there. Any maps? No maps. Hold on. Let's see how, just for a perspective of Iran. So let's see. Well, I feel like it could go even higher than that. But yeah, I mean, so you go into Europe essentially, and you can see how it is right next to Greece. Yeah, no, I mean, arguably this would be more realistic, because it could have gone into Slavic coasts of Dalmatia and North Italy. And maybe it didn't have all of South Italy, but there would have been high amounts of interaction between South Italy. So a little bigger there for you. But we imagine this is, reaching into India, but really, it went all the way in here, and it interacted in Italy. So it's crazy. Iran, essentially, we have evidence of controlling Italy, at least parts of Italy. And that's pretty cool. So let's go back to a few pages. Okay. So, three, probably introduced during the second half of the Achaemenid era. Zurvanism enjoyed a royal sanctions during the Sassanid era in 651 up before Islam, but no traces of it remain beyond the 10th century. Although Sassanid era Zurvanism was certainly influenced by Hellenistic philosophy, any relationship between it and the Greek divinity of time, aka Kronos, has not been conclusively established. Non-Zoroastrian accounts of typically Zurvanite beliefs were the first traces of Zoroastrianism to reach the West, leading European scholars to conclude that Zoroastrianism was a monist religion. An issue of controversy amongst both scholars and contemporary practitioners of the faith. Zurvan appears in Sanskrit as Zarva, and the etymology of Sarvastic Vadins, a monistic Buddhist sect. Okay, well, we gotta go there. Suggesting at least a common conceptual link to Zurvanism, depending on how the word Sarvastivada is parsed. Evidence of the cult. Eudemus of Rhodes, as cited in Damasius, Difficulties and Solutions of First Principles in the 6th century AD. Eudemus describes a sect of the Medes that consider space/time to be the primordial father of the rivals Oromazdas of light and Arminius of darkness. Arminius. The principal evidence for Zurvanite doctrine occurs in the polemical Christian tracts of Armenian and Syriac writers of the Sassanid period. Indigenous sources of information from the same period are in the 3rd century Kartir, inscriptions of Kaaba, Zoroast, and the early 4th century edicts of Mir Nars, head priest under Yazdegerd I. The latter being the only native evidence from the Sassanid period that is frankly Zurvanite. The post-Sassanid Zoroastrian Middle Persian commentaries are primarily Mazdian, and with only one exception, 10th century Denkard 930, do not mention Zurvan at all. Of the remaining so-called Pahlavi texts, only two, the Menog Krad and the selections of Zatspram, both 9th century, reveal a Zurvanite tendency. The latter, in which the priest of Zatspram chastises his brother's unmazdian ideas. In the last text in the Middle Persian that provides any evidence of the cult of Zurvan, in the 13th century Zoroastrianism, Ulema-i-Islam, response to doctors of Islam, a new Persian apologetic text is unambiguously Zurvanite, and is also the last direct evidence of Zurvan as a first principle. There's no hint of any worship of Zurvan in any of the texts of Avesta, even though the texts as they exist today are the result of Sassanid era redaction. Zahner, a British academic whose field of study was Eastern religions, let's go definitely look at Robert Charles Zahner for at some point, proposes that this is because the individual Sassanid monarchs were not always Zurvanite, and that Mazdian Zoroastrianism just happened to have the upper hand during the crucial period, and that canon was finally written down in the text composed prior to the Sassanid period. Zurvan appears twice as both an abstract concept and as a minor divinity, but there is no evidence of a cult. In Yasna 72:10, Zervan is invoked in the company of space and air, Vata Vayu. And in the Yasht 1356, the plant grow in the manner time has ordained according to the will of Ahura Mazda and the Amesha Spentas. Two other references to Zervan are also present in the Venedadad, but although these are late additions to the canon, they again do not establish any evidence of a cult. Zervan does not appear to in any listing of the Yazadas. The origins of the cult of Zervan remain debated. One view considers Zervanism to have developed out of Zoroastrianism as a reaction to the liberalization of the late Achaemenid era form of the faith. Another view proposed Zervan existed as a pre-Zoroastrian divinity that was incorporated into Zoroastrianism. The third view is that Zervanism is the product of the contact between Zoroastrianism and Babylonian Akkadian religions. For a summary of opposing views, see Boyce. Well, that's something that we're going to have to look into at some point. Certain, however, is that by the Sassanid era, the divinity infinite time was well established and inferred from a Manichaean text presented to Shapir, in which the name Zervan was adopted to Manichaeism's primordial father of greatness. I'm going to go back into Manichaeism because we looked at that for a second earlier, but I don't think we really got into what it was about. It is, however, not known. Okay, really quickly also. Zervanism appears to have developed as a cult and was presumably in the period that Greek and Indic concepts were introduced to Zervanite Zoroastrianism. It is, however, not known whether Sassanid era Zervanism and Mazdaism were separate sects, each with their own organization and priesthood, or simply two tendencies within the same body. That Mazdaism and Zervanism competed for attention has been inferred from the works of Christian and Manichaean polemists, but the doctrinal incompatibilities were not so extreme that they could not be reconciled under the broad aegis of an imperial church. More likely it is that the two sects served different segments of Sassanid society, with dispassionate Zervanism primarily operating as a mystic cult, and passionate Mazdaism serving the community at large. And you can see the decline and disappearance thing. It clearly has to do with the fact that Islam starts to break apart. But yeah, let's read what Boyce has to say, because gradually supplanted by Islam. Opinion survey strict over. Here it is. Okay, so another possible explanation postulated by Boyce is that Mazdaism and Zervanism were divided regionally. That is, Mazdaism being the predominant tendency in the regions to the north and the east, Bactria, Margiana, and others satrapies close to Zoroaster's homeland, while Zervanism was prominent in regions to the south and to the west, closer to Babylon and to Greece's influence. This supported by Manichaean evidence that indicates the 3rd century Mazdian Zoroastrians had their stronghold in Parsha, in the northeast. Following the fall of the Persian Empire, the south and west were relatively quickly assimilated under the banner of Islam, while the north and east remained independent for some time before these regions too were absorbed. This could also explain why Armenian Syriac observations revealed a distinctly Zervanite Zoroastrianism, and inversely could explain the strong Greek and Babylonian connections and interaction with Zervanism. The twin brother doctrine. Classical Zervanism is a term coined by Zarnier to denote the movement to explain the inconsistencies between the description of Zoroaster's two spirits. Genuinely Iran and Zoroastrianism in that it sought to clarify the enigma of the two spirits that Zoroaster left unsolved. As the priesthood sought to explain it, if the malevolent spirit, Angra Manu, and the benevolent spirit, Spenta Manu, identified with Ahura Mazda, they were twins, they must have had a parent who must have existed before them. The priesthood settles on Zervan, the hypostasis of the infinite time, as being the only possible absolute from which the twins could proceed, and which was the source of good in the one and the source of evil in the other. The Zervanite twin brother doctrine is also evident in Zervanism's cosmogonical creation myth. The classic form of the creation myth does not contradict the Mazdian model of the origin and evolution of the universe, which begins where the Zervanite model ends. It may well be that the Zervanite cosmogony was an adaptation of the antecedent Hellenistic Chronos cosmogony that portrayed infinite time as the, quote, father of time, not to be confused with the Titan Kronos, father of Zeus, whom the Greeks equated with Ahura Mazda. So, I mean, there's, implications here on Zervanism. I'm going to pull up, I think we talked a bit about this, but we'll go into it deeper. In the beginning, God created Zervan. The god Zervan existed alone, desiring offspring that would create heaven and hell and everything in between. Zervan sacrificed for 1,000 years. Towards the end of the period, androgyny, Zervan began to doubt the efficacy of sacrifice, and in the moment of his doubt, Oromuzda and Ahriman were conceived. Oromuzda for the sacrifice and Ahriman for the doubt. Upon realizing the twins were to be born, Zervan resolved to grant the firstborn sovereignty over creation. Oromuzda perceived Zervan's decision, which he then communicated to his brother. Ahriman then preempted Oromuzda by ripping open the womb to first emerge. Reminded of the resolution to grant Ahriman sovereignty, Zervan conceded, but limited kingship to a period of 9,000 years, after which Oromuzda would rule for all eternity. Christian and Manichaean missionaries consider the doctrine to be exemplary of the Zoroastrian faith, and it was these and similar texts that first reached the West. Okay, so you get this idea of material Zervanism, aesthetic Zervanism is about dualism to an extent, but it also is where we get this idea of an end to the evil era, that we're living in an era that's evil, but it's coming to an end. And when it ends, there will be an infinite era of perfect times coming. And why do we live in this time? Because there was a selfish, instinctual spirit that is in the human condition, in the conditions of nature. And it is the dynamic, antithetical opposite, diametrically opposed in every way to kindness, goodness, and making a sacrifice to the benefit of someone else, right? And that's good versus bad in this prototypical ancient way of looking at it. Connections to Sarvastic Vadins, and I wish Giant was here. We're gonna have to get Giant on to talk at some point about some of this stuff, because I know he's got a pretty good handle of the Veda and of Buddhism and of some of its connections with, we don't realize how Western these Eastern thoughts are. That a lot of these thoughts are playing back on Hellenism. Like we just said, Greece has influenced, and Babylon has been influenced by the West, and it's influencing the East. So, one of the earliest Buddhist schools established around the reign of Ashoka, it was particularly known as Abhidharma, the Abhidharma tradition, with a unique set of 7 Abhidharma works. The Sarvastic Vadins were one of the most influential Buddhist monastic groups, flourishing throughout North India, especially Kashmir and Central Asia, until the 7th century. Orthodox Kashmiri branches of the school compose a large and encyclopedic Mahavibhasa Sastra around the time of the reign of Kanishka, in 120 to around the time of Tertullian. So the Kushan dynasty, we're going to look into this. Because of this, Orthodox Sarvastic Vadins, who held up the doctrines in the Mahavibhasa. I wish it was just written in Sanskrit. Were called the Vaibhasikas. There we go. According to the Theravadin Dipavamsa, the Sarvastivada emerged from the older Mahasasaka schools, but the Sariputra Pariputra and the Samaya Bedo Parakanakra state. It's nice. Again, like, if you're going to do that, Just make it into, make it easier. State that the Mahasaka emerged from the Sarvastic Vada. The Sarvastic Vadins are believed to have given rise to the Mula Sarvastic Veda sect, as well as the Satrantika tradition, although the relationship between these two groups has not been fully determined. Brutal. Okay, so I'm learning right now that reading you guys Buddhist words, I'm going to have to practice those a little bit before I get into them. Tipavamsa, Satrantika, Mulavasa, yeah, okay. Ramalama Ding Dong. Sarvastic Vada in Sanskrit is a term that can be glossed as the theory of all exists. So it's kind of like epistemology. The Sarvastic Vada argued that all dharmas exist in the past, exist in the past, present, and future. They exist three times. Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Mako Sakarika, Dharma Sakumakarika states, he who affirms the existence of the dharmas of the three time periods, past, present, and future, is held to be a Sarvastic Vadin. Although there is some dispute over how the word Sarvastic Vada is to be analyzed, the general consensus is that it is to be parsed into three words: Sarva, Asti, and Vada, for every, exist, speak, and say, or theory. This equates perfectly with the Chinese term Shuyo Ikutubu, Shuyo Ikutubu, which is literally the sect that speaks of the existence of everything, as well as used by Zhang Sheng and other translators. The Sarvastic Vada was also known by other names, particularly Hetuvada and Yuktavada. Hetuvada comes from Hetu, cause, which indicates their emphasis on causation and conditionality. Yuktavada comes from yukti, meaning reason or even logic, which echo their use of rational arguments and syllogism. So here you've got a Hellenistic Buddhist sect, and that makes a lot of sense because if you ever read the Buddha Bible, there's a lot of these ancient stories that aren't so ancient, but they're kind of ancient, and they come from this period of intellectual Buddhism, which again is so far west of India and even West China that it's in Persia pretty much. It's just about as far as you need to go, and the Persians are therefore part of these sects and bringing information back and forth. The Kushan era enjoyed the patronage of Kanishika, who was that emperor, and because of that, it was very popular in northern India, where the Aryans were. The Sarvastic Veda school held a synod in Kashmir during the reign of Kanishika II. The most important Sarvastic Veda Abhidharma text, the Ashtagrantha of Katyana Putra, was rewritten and revised in Sanskrit. This revised text was now known as Jana Pranthasthana, the course of knowledge, though the Gandharan Ashtagrantha had many Vibrasa commentaries. The New Kashmiri Jana Prasthanta had a Sanskrit Mahavibhasa compiled by the Kashmiri Sarvastic Veda Synod. It was declared to be the new orthodoxy by Kashmiris, who called themselves Vaibhasikas. The new Vaibhasika orthodoxy, however, was not readily accepted by all the Sarvastic Vadins. Some Western masters from Gandhara and Bactria had divergent views which disagreed with the new Kashmiri orthodoxy. These disagreements can be seen in post-Mahavibhasa works such as the Tattva Siddhi Sastra, and the Abhidharma Daya and its commentaries. When the Chinese pilgrim Zhang Xuansong visited Kucha in 630 AD, he received the favors of Suvarma Deva, the son and successor of the Suvarma Puspa, and of Hinayana, king of Kucha. Xuansheng described in many details the characteristics of Kucha and probably visited the Kizil caves. Okay, so we'll get into the caves in a second. Another interesting thing about this area because we've talked. I mean, a lot of these things you're like, wait, I know about this. I've heard about this before. I've watched a YouTube video about Tartaria where they talked about these caves, but you don't know necessarily about the groups of monks who are in charge of their, their wisdoms or their historical wisdoms. Yeah, I think it's the word, the research that goes on there. So looking into this group, also check out some of these ruins. You have these mounds and these are not just normal. These are amazing ruins that are they're on top of things, and they have wheel systems that are very similar to some of the errata things that we see that are before Star Forts, arguably. Even just a few centuries before the original Star Forts are these wheels. They uphold 2 sutras who may or may not have been separate but in related group, and did not uphold or rather emphasize the Buddhist sutras as being authoritative. This, again, okay, influence. I'm not seeing enough of the Gnostic influences written here, so we're going to have to do something later. I'm going to get Giant on the show, and we can talk a bit more about the Sarvastic Veda, because this is where you're going to get into this idea of the connections between everything. Islam, Gnosis, Veda, Buddhism is, again, Buddhism is its own riff of a prophet on Veda with the Trinity, not too different from this other idea of having prophets of religion. So prophets start to emerge to these religions, and they do have followers of one to another that interact with each other. They say, oh, that's interesting. It's kind of how our group is looking at this. We would wonder then about that question, about this, and who is time, or what is time itself? These kinds of questions are being answered by the Sarvastic Veda. And I'll save Buddy for another time. Ancient Mesopotamian religions, we can get into this idea, but let's just really quickly mention it, and then we'll move on, because I think we'll save it for another time. The idea of polytheism, forces of nature, worship of dynamics, worship of not just the one, not the good or the bad, but of the relationship between the good and the bad that are causing the forces of nature, and the fascination with the forces of nature. I think that's, and then who are the gods? The gods are the masters of the forces of nature. So that, there's definitely more we could go into on that, but I'm not doing a video on ancient Mesopotamian religions right now. I want to save that. I want to get into Manichaeism. Let me just make sure that this isn't okay. Manichaeism in New Persian and in Chinese, Manichaeism. Look at that. The Chinese have their own name for it, which lets you know how far this is extended beyond the Persian language. Was a major religion founded in the 3rd century by the Parthian prophet Mani. I think we showed some of Mani, but I want to just remind you guys, these are the statues we have of Mani. Okay, so, again, Persian statues look kind of Asian if you start to look at them, but really it says that this guy was probably partially Asian. Like, he looks more Chinese than he looks, it could be that this is who made the statue, and you'll start to find more evidence of Persian looks, but yeah, there's a lot of evidence of him being kind of Chinese. Here's the execution of Mani in the as depicted in the 14th century illustration of the Shahnameh, which is the Book of Kings, a long epic poem written by Persian poet Ferdowsi for Sultan Mahmud Al-Ghazi. So, you're looking into Mani. Oh, Mani. He's born south of Baghdad in Mesopotamia. So if he was Asian, we have to know what that means about Iraq. But for the most part, Iraq was, it was a trading hub, a mixing pot. It could have very easily that he had had some Asian influences. For sure, though, he could have had blonde influences, because there's a lot of people there, Yazidi included, blonde, blue-eyed people. So it's not unlikely that he was blonde or Chinese or Arabic looking, whatever that really means. I mean, the point is that this is a place where it was a major city. He could have been anybody. And he's been, connected with Buddhism, Gnosticism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism. And in Buddhism, he was once widespread, but is no longer prevalent by name. So Buddhism has de-emphasized Mani. And a lot of the reasons because those who were his followers have been killed, suppressed, persecuted, and he himself was essentially like a saint. He was martyred. So let me go down to the works, teachings. Mani's teaching was intended to succeed and surpass the teaching of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism. It was based on a rigid dualism of good and evil, locked in internal struggle. Okay, so getting back into that idea of there being a struggle between nature, that the natural forces, that the gods are the masters of natural forces, and that we were worshiping not good or evil, but worshiping the struggle of dualism between good or evil. Or rather, that is what Manichaeism is in general. In his mid-20s, Mani decided the salvation was possible through education, self-denial, fasting, and chastity. According to al-Biruni, a 10th century Iranian scholar, Mani claimed to have been the paraclete promised in the New Testament and the last prophet. I mean, like, that's just too great. It's, two birds in one stone wrapped into one. However, according to Ludwig J.R. Orth, the term last prophet may in all probability be derived from the Quran by al-Biruni in order to formulate Mani's pretensions and religious claims. Therefore, Ludwig J.R. Orth concludes that a definitive pronouncement about the final character of Mani's appearance is not mentioned in Manichaeistic scriptures. While his religion was not strictly a movement of Christian Gnosticism in the early mode, Mani did declare himself to be one or an apostle of Jesus Christ. And extant Manichaean poetry frequently extols Jesus and his mother Mary with the highest of reverences. Manichaean tradition also noted to have claimed that Mani was the reincarnation of different religious figures, including Jesus, Zoroaster, and the historical Buddha. Okay, so I just want you guys to really get Mani. Get Mani, all right? Oh, Mani. And look a little bit deeper into Manichaeism, because this is going to be on the test. Just kidding. Mani's followers were organized in a church structure divided into class of electi, and auditors, auditores. Only the electi are required to follow the laws strictly, while the auditors care for them, hoping to become electi in their turn after reincarnation. Western Christian traditions of Mani is based on Socrates of Constantinople, historian writing the 5th century. According to this account, one of the Scythianos, a Sarkaran, and a husband of an Egyptian woman, introduced the doctrine of Empedocles and Pythagoras into Christianity. He had a disciple, Buddha's formerly named Terebinthus, not Terebinthus, is it? Who traveled in Persia, where he alleged that he had been born of a virgin. Afterward, wrote 4 books: one of mysteries, a second of the gospel, a third the treasure, and a 4th heads. While performing some mystic rites, he was hurled down a precipice by a daimon and killed. A woman at whose house he lodged buried him, took over the property, and bought a boy of 7 named Kubricus. The boy she freed and educated, leaving him the property and books of Buddha's Terebinthus. Kubricus then later traveled into Persia, where he took the name of Manes, and gave forth the doctrines of Buddha's Terebinthus as his own. The king of Persia, hearing that he worked miracles, sent for him to heal his sick son, and on the child's dying bed put Manes in prison. Thence he escaped, flying into Mesopotamia, but was traced, captured, and flayed alive by the Persian king's orders, the skin being then stuffed with chaff and hung up before the gates of the city. I mean, if you're king and you deal with people all kinds of ways, you get creative. According to Jerome, Archelaus wrote his account of the disputation with Manichaeus in Syriac, whence it was translated into Greek. The Greek is lost, and the work, apart from extracts, subsists only in Latin translations from the Greek, of doubtful age and fidelity, probably made after the 5th century by Photius. It is stated that Heraclean, bishop of Chalcedon, bishop of Chalcedon, in his book against the Manichaeans, said that the disputation of Archelaus was written by one hegemonious and an author not otherwise traceable and of unknown date. In the late narrative, Manes is said to have come after his flight from court from Arabion, a frontier fortress, to Kashgar, a town said to be in Roman Mesopotamia, in the hopes of converting an eminent Christian there named Marcellus, to whom he had sent a letter beginning, Manichaeus, apostle of Jesus Christ, and all the saints and virgins with me, send peace to Marcellus. In his train he bought 22 or 12 youths and virgins. At the request of Marcellus, he debated on religion with Bishop Archelaus, by whom he was vanquished, whereupon he set out to return to Persia. On his way he proposed to debate with a priest at his hometown of Diodorides, but Archelaus came to the priest's place and again defeated him, whereupon, fearing to be given up to the Persians by the Christians, he returned to Arabion. At this state, Archelaus introduced in a discourse to the people his history of this Manes, very much to the effect of recapitulation in Socrates. Among the further details are this, that the Scythianus lived in the times of the apostles, that Terebinthus said that the name of Buddha had been imposed upon him, that in the mountains he had been brought up by an angel, and that he had been convicted of imposture by a Persian prophet named Parsis, and by Labdacus, son of Mithra. Furthermore, that in the disputation he taught concerning the sphere, the two luminaries, the transmigration of the souls, and the war of Principia against God, that Corbicius or Corbicus, about the age of 60, translated the book of Terebinthus. He made 3 chief disciples, Thomas, Adas, and Hermas, of whom he sent the first to Egypt, and the second of Scythia, keeping the third with him. The 2 former returned where he was in prison, and he sent them to procure for him the books of the Christians, which he then studied, according to the Latin narrative. Finally, Manes, on his return to Arabion, was seized and taken to the Persian king, by whose orders he was flayed, his body being left to birds, and his skin, filled with air, hung at the city gate. One of his, again, with things to do. Here's another picture of him hanging out and reading stuff. Pretty nice. Manny is described by a painter. I mean, is there anything I can find on some of the beliefs more quickly? Here we go. The Manny Codex is a thing. Here's some books on the subject. Some prophets of Manny. I'll pull them up. Gospel of Manny. There you go. Okay. Let me pull up the Gospel of Manny first. I think that's right. Okay. And then also I'm going to, I'll do Manichaeism. I should just do that first. Okay. Beliefs. There we go. Mani's teaching dealt with the origins of evil, addressing a theoretical part of the problem of evil by denying the omnipotence of God and postulating 2 opposite powers. Manichaean theology taught a dualistic view of good and evil. A key belief is Manichaeism is that the powerful thought not omnipotent good power, God, was opposed by the eternal evil power, devil. The humanity, the world, and the soul are seen as by the byproduct of the product and is the product of the battle between God's proxy, primal man, and the devil. The human person is seen as a battleground for these powers. The soul defines the person, but is under the influence of both light and dark. The contention plays out over the world as well as over the body. Neither the earth nor the flesh were seen as intrinsically evil, but rather possessed portions of light and dark. Natural phenomena such as rain was seen as a physical manifestation of this spiritual contention. Therefore, the Manichaean view explained the existence of evil by positing a flawed creation in the formation of which God took no part and which constituted rather the product of a battle by the devil against God. Manichaeism presented an elaborate description of the conflict between the spiritual world of light and the material world of darkness. The beings of both the world of darkness and the world of light have names. There are numerous sources for the detail of the Manichaean beliefs. There are the two portions of the Manichaean scriptures that are probably the closest thing to the original Manichaean writings in their original language that will ever be available. These are the Syriac Aramaic quotations by the Nestorian Christian Theodore Bar Kokhba, which we'll save him for a while, and his Syriac book of Scholia, and the Middle Persian section of Mani's Shabu Ragan, which means dedicated to Sabur, Sabur Ragan, also translated in Chinese as the Erzhan Jing, or the text of two principles. Okay, we'll save that. Discovered at Turpan, a summary of Mani's teachings prepared for Shapur, the first emperor of the Sasani king of kings of Iran. From these and other sources, it's possible to derive an almost complete description of the detailed Manichaean vision. A complete list of Manichaean deities is outlined below. Well, I'm thinking it's about 6 o'clock. So I might save the rest of that for tomorrow and go deeper into the Gnostic text, the Gospel of Mani, and the etc. So I hope that's okay with you. Let me look through the chat really quickly, see what kind of chat questions we got. Wow. Okay, you know what? I should really be looking at my super chats. Thank you guys for sending me super chats. Let me see. I've got the prompt. Let me go. Wow, several of you guys. I really appreciate that. The more you do that, the more I'll read your super chats. Baked and Awake, thank you very much for the coffee and the tea fund. I clearly, you know me, clearly need that coffee. Even though I don't ever drink caffeine, it's just for obvious reasons. Thank you for being you, Andreas, says the program. Thank you for being you from Britain with your £5 sterling. I could definitely use that. You tie up so many loose ends well. I go off on so many tangents while trying to explain things to people. Thank you. And this is kind of part of the point, is make it easy for you guys to go on tangents, because you're all great researchers yourself. I hope that some of these pages, you're like, oh yeah, that's a word I can then rabbit hole from. I'm going to show you another really cool trick. Friday, I'm going to show you a cool trick on how I use searching. If you want a clue to that, watch my talk with Ryan Long. But I'll give you a clue on some interesting stuff you can do for technology. Recent Tartarians sends $5. Thank you, Recent Tartarians, our most loyal follower and fan, and friend. Travis McClung, keep live streaming for us. It's awesome. Yeah, I will keep live streaming. Apparently people are down, so I'll make sure this keeps happening. I'm glad the audio is better this time. I think let me look through if there's any more important questions. A lot of you guys are asking questions about geometry. We'll do a thing at some point on Pythagoras and Tyr, because we mentioned him before. It's really important to go into the religiosity of math. Venice Beach Dub Club, thank you for being here. I appreciate Ja Rastafari. What's the rest of that? How's the rest of that go? Selassie I. Isbingir, let Jah be praised. Megusalaga, let Jah be praised. Anything by Peter Tosh is spiritually true. Carl Matern's asking, why am I reading stuff on Wikipedia? Well, I'm not going to be reading Wikipedia forever. It's just that it's so 101 that you can just really quickly go through hundreds of pages, and from there, then you can go to the cited sources and you can pull up all sorts of other things. I mean, if you have a better 101, then, send me that, and I'll easily switch. I mean, I know there's metaphysical wikis, there are psychonaut wikis. I mean, I like wikis for that purpose. If you want me to read more specifically articles, and I will be doing that more, getting deeper into specifically just reading an article about a thing, it's deeper, it takes longer, it's worth doing, but just send me the links and I'll start doing that more. I believe next week and the week after I'll have more time. This started out as me just trying to get through my tabs, and I had a bunch of wiki tabs so I could just be like, what is this word? What is that word? And again, I find it interesting to see what the mainstream narrative is, but more importantly, it's hard to argue with me. I mean, you guys and I can talk about what we think is not true about the Wikipedia, but normal people will look at this and say, okay, he's just reading Wikipedia, not too subversive or countercultural. It's literally just things that are acceptable to look at. So that's the main reason. I'm trying not to get in too much trouble yet. I think, I don't know if you guys know, but I appreciate the super chats because I'm getting blocked on my ads, sort of. They're saying we have to review your video while it's happening. I'm sure they're paying people money just to make sure I don't say things that are unacceptable. So I'm being careful. That's part of the reason I'm using Wikipedia. But I'm also being sure to tell you guys things you need to know. Well, bounce off to other sources. Recent Tartarians. Wiki can be trash. Yeah, Wiki can be trash, but it leads you to cited sources, right? So let me just really quickly, since you guys are wondering, why I'm choosing the pages I'm choosing also, that's a big part of this. Not every Wikipedia page is going to be as doctored as other ones. Nobody cares about this, except for Manichaeists and anthropologists. There's not a lot of people saying, oh man, we got to take out that part of the Manichaeist wiki that tells you about whatever. So that's a main reason for, it's acceptable. But the thing here is, boom, I can go on archive.org and I can find now the actual entire Mani Codex, which we'll get into next time more. Where did I put that? Yeah, this is the Cologne Mani Codex, and yeah, this article on Wikipedia is the shortest article, right? That's how you know this is a very important subject. This one they have hidden aspects of. So if you want to see it, you go click on the link and boom, it's going to start having a lot more there. So I agree with you. We should not be using exclusively Wikipedia. Using some Wikipedia, that's not going to kill us. You know what I mean? I think we'll be okay using just some Wikipedia. Okay. Now, let me just check out the last of these questions. Lori says, we are in quantum, no time, instantaneous entrainment. Yes, I think that's a big part of this dynamic battle. Justin, force be with you. Any plans to come to Austin, Texas? I keep inviting me. I'm supposed to go soon. I want to see Alex Stein and some friends and see Alex. A couple Alexes in Austin. I got to visit around Texas. So, or is he in Dallas? I think one of the Alexes is not in Austin. I could be wrong. Either way, I would love to come to Texas soon. So hit me up on the Discord. Go to tartarinova.com, andreas.me. If you guys were trying to get me on a show, I know a bunch of people have been trying to get me on shows. Just send me an email. Let me fit you. I'll figure out when I can fit on my schedule. I've got a lot of shows coming up. So it'll probably be in a couple weeks when I'll have time, but thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to do your shows. And one more thing. No, I think that's good. All right. Well, I love you guys. Make sure you go watch Adam Krigler's show or something. Take care.